Hello everyone, welcome back to Reiki Radio. I am your host, Yolanda, and I am so happy to have you joining me today. Today we are going to be talking about embracing your divine self. Okay, so in the last episode we talked about healing the past, and so I think a good follow-up to that is really embracing our divine nature. But before we get started into that, as always, I just want to remind you that if you have any questions, comments, feedback, any show topics that you would like for me to discuss, please email me through my website, which is yewchi.com. That's YEWCHI.com. And you can contact me there. You can also sign up for my free newsletter, and you will have access to free downloads and receive information about upcoming classes, which are held online. I do teach Reiki as well in San Diego, and you will receive notification of that and other things. It's a good way to keep in touch because, again, we are all community, and I'm glad that we have this space to exchange globally here on this podcast arena. So let's just get into today's topic, embracing your divine self. Now, really, I am in the thought of that this is the point of our whole spiritual awakening, our spiritual path. You know, we all get to this space of questioning what is the purpose of life, what is the meaning of life, and oftentimes we find ourselves on this path because we're seeking our divine purpose. It's really interesting. It's like this internal voice that's always lingering there in the background that is causing us to question what we may be doing, what we may believe, what's going on in the world around us. But we oftentimes ignore that inner voice, or we just leave it with the question of what is the meaning of all of this. Now, what's interesting is a lot of us start off on these paths trying to answer that exact question. What am I? Who am I? What is my purpose? What is the meaning in all of this? And we start out on this journey of exploration. And as I shared with all of you a couple of episodes ago, this all started with me with the practice of Reiki and meditation. And since then, I have gone into study of intuitive development. I've studied several different techniques within this realm of metaphysical science and spirituality, and all of it was just to lead me back in to me and trying to understand who and what I am. I even, learned to read oracle cards and have explored tarot and all of these different divinations. And as beautiful as all of these tools are, I think a lot of us miss on the beauty that all of them really do just kind of guide us back into our own inner knowing, our own inner guidance, that inner voice that we all have, but again, we may not be familiar with yet. So when we talk about embracing our divine self, it's really about aligning with our true self. And again, as I shared with you, Reiki is a beautiful technique because it is also a way of life that helps you to awaken to your true self, the totality of who and what you are, which is so much more than just this physical vessel. It's so much more than the roles that we have taken on. It's so much more than the titles that you may have. So for example, I want you to think about that for a second. Who are you? And when you ask yourself that question, do you really know, or is it followed up with a huge, I don't know. I don't know who I am. And, there is nothing wrong with that. But if you do know who you are or who you perceive yourself to be so far, oftentimes we answer that question with things like our name, again, our titles, our roles, like maybe what you do for work, or that you are a parent or a wife or a husband or a sister or brother, and so on. We identify who we are with a lot of external factors and, again, roles that we may have taken on in this lifetime. But the truth is that you are so much more than that. And, it makes me think of the expression that's often used in yoga, namaste. Namaste is loosely translated as the divine in me acknowledges the divine in you. And although we say a lot of these spiritual phrases, we don't always necessarily really go deeper with them or really consider the weight of them or even consider the actual embodiment of them. So that, for example, the divine in me acknowledges the divine in you. Do you see yourself, acknowledge yourself as an aspect of the divine? Do you see that in all living things? And if you do or don't, either way, just consider what that really means to you. To see the divine in yourself in all living things. Now, what's interesting is this can be challenging for us because of beliefs and conditioning and our judgments. So a lot of times we look at ourselves and we fall into self-criticism. We oftentimes have claimed the stories or the perceptions or opinions that other people have even placed on us. And so we don't necessarily recognize the divine in ourselves. We recognize what we may see as our faults, what's wrong with us, or again, these roles and titles and things like this. And on the other side, when we look out into the world and we think like, okay, I'm supposed to see the divine in all things. Well, how is that possible when people do such terrible things or people are acting in such hurtful ways? It can be very difficult for us to acknowledge the divine in that. But one of the things that I have learned in this is that we don't judge the divine by his or her cover. So, a lot of times when we are looking at ourselves or even looking at other people and we think there's no way that this is an expression of the divine, well, the truth is, regardless of how we are expressing ourselves, it doesn't take away the fact that we are actually an aspect of the divine. What it is showing is that we may not realize our divinity. If we all really knew and understood that we were of the divine, we probably would act differently. We probably would be differently. We would be love, an expression of love. We wouldn't treat each other the way that we do. We wouldn't treat ourselves the way that we do. But what happens in this incarnation is we came to learn. We came to have these life experiences. We came to come to this classroom for the soul, so to speak, to help us evolve and to help us remember what it is and what it means to be the divine while in form. So in many ways, this incarnation has caused us to disconnect. We had to take on these roles of separation, of self-identity to exist in form. That's how we have this perception of there's me, there's you, there's them. There's a separation. We have these identities. But if we truly understood beyond concept that we were one with all that exists, we wouldn't be in this form necessarily because we would recognize that we were one. Now, while we are here, we can awaken to this truth and still exist in form because we will only understand it in this form to a certain level or a certain level of consciousness. So this is what so many people are working towards when they are working towards enlightenment. They are working on recognizing the light within themselves. That is the same light within all living things. That is the one light, the source of all creation. So before we go too deep into that, I just want to talk about embracing your divine self. And it really starts with knowing yourself in a new way. So, again, we have many perceptions of who we are. We've even made many claims about who we are. And again, a lot of times we have taken on other people's opinions and ideas and judgments about who we are. A lot of times we show up in life not in our authenticity and not willing or comfortable enough to be vulnerable enough to stand in even what we think is true, because we want to feel like we belong. We want to fit in. We don't want to be judged or criticized and all of these things. So in so many ways, we have trained ourselves to mute out that inner voice, that higher consciousness, that higher aspect of us, because we're trying to identify with all of these other people, these other individuals who don't recognize themselves as one. So, okay, you've, playing along, but again, there's that inner voice that still kind of taps you on your shoulder every now and again and says, there's more to life than this. I am more than I am perceiving myself to be. I know that I'm more capable than I can imagine. And I know that really at the core of who I am is the divine. Well, how do we align with that? How do we embrace that? Now, even as we talk about this today, I want you to start thinking about, if you do stand in your authenticity, where you do and where you don't. I want you to think about the times where you feel comfortable and confident to express your truth, and then the areas of life where you don't. Anywhere where you don't, I want you to consider why. What are you afraid of? What is the fear? And overall, is your life, the life that you are living, is it an expression of who you truly are? Now, this is very interesting because a lot of times, again, when we're seeking our purpose because we don't feel aligned with what we feel we are called to do. And a lot of times that calling, that inner calling, is directly aligned with, some sort of, a lot of times it's artistic expression, it's helping others, it's some kind of contribution to the collective that to us feels meaningful and purposeful. But a lot of times we are aligned with a path in life that we were told we were supposed to take, or that we felt safe in taking, and then we go along on these paths and we learn a lot, but they don't necessarily feel fulfilling, right? We still feel a void or some sort of dissatisfaction. Well, one of the things I want to tell you before we go any further, and if you are feeling that way, like if you do feel like, oh yeah, I do feel like I'm not aligned with my purpose and my passion, I feel like I've wasted so much time. First of all, I want to point out for all of us that we are always in our purpose. And everything on your life path so far, whether it's your job, your career, again, roles that you've taken on, whether it's a parent, siblings, whatever, relationships that you've been in, they've all been part of your path for a reason. They've all presented lessons. They've all presented opportunities to see yourself and know yourself in new ways. They've all presented opportunities to recognize your patterns and your hurt and what you may be ready to heal or transform. They've all ultimately been chipping away at these outer layers beyond the noise to help you reconnect with that light, that divine self that exists within all beings. So don't have any regret. Don't freak out if you feel like you have not yet found your path or purpose, because everything that you have done so far has been leading you there. And you may have, on a soul level, chosen certain lessons and experiences intentionally to learn very particular things along the way. So whenever you come to this space of wanting to awaken to who and what you are, it's the perfect timing for you. And you've planned it out this way for a reason. So don't have any regrets around that. But to embrace our divine self, we first have to know our divine self. We have to become aware of that inner voice as not just, something that we ignore or just remains unfamiliar to us. So I always tell people this way. It's kind of like, like the angel and the devil on our shoulders. It's these different aspects of who and what we are, right? And so we have that inner voice that's more like the ego, the part of us that has been experiencing this life and, that has been hurt and that has been let down and that has been afraid of being vulnerable and all of these things. But we also have that other inner voice that is our higher guidance, our higher self, our divine self that is always there, trying to encourage us, inspire us, and guide us. The part of us that tells us everything is okay. The part of us that says you are strong enough and you can get through this. The part of you that inspires you to get through the tough times when you feel like there's nothing possible, right? And then somehow you make it through. You have this divine essence. And the key really is for us to become more familiar with that aspect of ourselves so that we can allow ourselves to be led by our divine self more frequently instead of being led by fear-based ego. And the beauty is, you don't have to vilify your ego. It serves a purpose, and really it thinks that it's protecting you in some way. But by allowing yourself to become familiar with your divine self or your higher consciousness, you then choose which aspect of you is in charge, and then you can train the ego and lift the ego into that space of higher awareness. But let's just start at the beginning. So, again, to embrace our divine self, we have to know our divine self. And that's the essence of you that exists beyond the perceptions that you've adopted in this physical realm. Well, what are you even? We talked about who are you beyond the roles and perceptions. But what are you? Now, again, we can look at ourselves. We can feel our bodies. We're like, okay, we're these physical things. We're human. But what does that even mean? There's also this non-physical essence about us. This non-physical presence, our spirit. So I want you to think of it this way, because some people, we need examples to experience these things because they can seem out there, right? So I want you to right now, without moving your mouth, without making a sound, just in your mind, ask yourself, who am I? Now, when you asked yourself, who am I? Where did that voice come from? That inner voice that you heard. Now, you may or may not have gotten a response, but either way, you had an inner voice that asked, who am I? A voice that didn't require the use of your physical vessel, of your mouth. That inner voice that is a part of you, an aspect of you. Now, if you are not driving and it's safe for you to do so, go ahead and close your eyes. And if you can't close your eyes, you can even try this with your eyes open. I want you to envision an elephant. Okay, let that image fade. And I want you to envision a rose. What color is this rose? What does the bulb look like? Is it open, closed? Okay, and if you did close your eyes, go ahead and open them. And I want you to acknowledge that you have an inner vision. You're able to see, feel, or sense that elephant. You're able to see, feel, or sense the rose. Now, the reason I'm saying see, feel, or sense, because energetically speaking, we may translate energy differently. Some people are more visual, they're more clairvoyant. Some people just have more of a sense or a knowing, and some people are more clairaudient, which means they may hear things. But either way, whether you had a clear visual of the elephant and the rose, or you just had an impression of them being there, you still saw the elephant and the rose. Now, you saw that without your physical eyes, and it's possible because you have an inner vision. You have this aspect of you, again, that is non-physical, that also has sensory. Now, when we talk about intuitive development or intuition, a lot of times you hear about the clairs, again, like clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentient, different clairs. And basically what they are is they are our senses, but in a non-physical form. Just like we have physical sensory, like your physical eyes, your nose, your taste, your touch. We have ways of sensing and perceiving the non-physical. Another example of how you do this is an example I gave a couple of episodes ago. You know, you may walk into a space and you can feel the tension in the room. It doesn't matter what anyone is saying. They may not be saying a word, but the tension, the energy is so thick that you can sense it. How are you sensing what is non-physical? Because you are also non-physical. You are also energetic. And so as you start to acknowledge this aspect of you, and that this part of you is able to perceive beyond the physical realm, you start to come into relationship with this other aspect of you. So your divine self, your higher self, it can guide you. Now, it's very important to get familiar with these different aspects of you so that you are trusting your higher guidance. Now, what happens is we have become so familiar with ego, which also has an inner voice, and we've become so familiar with ego that we tend to trust it more. But it's only because we haven't gotten to know our divine self. And it does take some trust and faith to go out on a limb and trust this divine guidance, which oftentimes doesn't have a guarantee as we would see it, because it often takes us out of our patterns, our routines of doing things the old ways, which actually are no longer supporting us. Your higher guidance, your divine self, is oftentimes guiding you to go in a way that's more aligned with your truth, which again is often going in a way that's very unfamiliar. So, one of the ways you can start to embrace your divine self is simply by acknowledging you. When you are having that inner dialogue with yourself, anytime you ask yourself a question, pay attention to the aspects of you that start answering. Now, your ego is oftentimes more fear-based, right? Your ego is going to tell you why something isn't going to work. Your ego is going to be afraid of things going wrong. Your ego is going to just, again, be fear-based in a lot of ways. Whereas your higher self is not going to be fear-based. In fact, it'll be very neutral, and it's often matter-of-fact. Your higher guidance and your intuitive self just comes across with, it's not triggered necessarily by emotion or driven by emotion. It is, again, just very matter of fact. And so as you start to pay attention to these different inner voices, this different aspects of you, you start to become familiar with your divine self, your divine guidance. And the more you tune into that, the more you may start to trust it because it becomes more familiar. And the more you may start going out on a limb and trusting that divine guidance. Now think about how many times you've done it, right? How many times you may have been guided to do something, it didn't make sense to you, you didn't know why, but you just felt pulled or called to do this particular thing. And you did it, and it worked out, and it was just great, and you were so thankful that you trusted yourself. Or think about those times where you feel so aligned with you, and you're not afraid, and you're confident, and you are just, everything seems to be lining up. That's when you're in that alignment with your higher self, your divine self, outside of the fear, outside of the worry. It kind of reminds me of when you hear about athletes and they say they're in their zone or they go into the zone. It's like that space of our divine alignment, embracing our divine nature. Now, the beauty of this is we are expressions of the divine. But what you want to start considering is if you are expressing your divine nature. Are you expressing and showing up and communicating even from a space of love, from a space of compassion? Are you making decisions based on fear? Those are really clear ways to show you if you're functioning from your ego or your higher self. Your higher guidance is going to be more solution-based, right? So again, another example would be if you are like, oh, should I take this new job? The ego may have a lot of doubt, fear, worry, blah, blah, blah. Your higher self will be more matter of fact. Either, yes, this will be in support of you, or no, it will not. And then if you tune into that even deeper, you can ask yourself, well, what will be in support of me? That's actually the best question. Anytime you have something to consider, a decision to make, a choice to make, one of the ways you can tune into your higher self right away is, one, make the decision. Tell yourself, I want to see this from a higher state of consciousness. I want to communicate with my divine self. And then your question is going to be, what will best support me? What will best support my path? And then see what comes through to you. So when you explore this inner vision, you explore your inner voice, you really start to even tune more into the heart. Now, the interesting thing in this whole realm of spirituality, when we think about the mind and we talk about consciousness, a lot of people defer to the brain, and your mind is so much more expansive than the brain, okay? Your mind and your consciousness is really, like every aspect of you is consciousness, but the heart is really like the higher aspect of your consciousness. So you start to tune into the voice of your heart, and that's why we have that saying even, follow your heart, and all of these things. But aside from this higher aspect of you, which you can start practicing and acknowledging and tuning into, another part of embracing your divine self is also embracing your uniqueness. Yes, we are all an aspect of the divine, and yes, we are all an aspect of divine love. We are all one. But in this realm of duality and in this realm of individuality, you have a unique personality. You have this soul that has journeyed through many incarnations. You have, if we look at astrology, you were born at a very specific day, time, location, which adds to some coloring of your personality, your gifts, your challenges. And even we can look at something like numerology and get some more insight about your uniqueness. Embrace your unique expression of the divine. I point this out because part of embracing our divine self is, again, being true to ourselves, being authentic, standing in our authenticity. And a lot of times that just comes down again to acknowledging what feels right and true for you. What are your gifts? What are your talents? What does make you unique? If you were to follow your heart and your divine inspiration, what would change in your life? Are there any different choices you would make? Would anything look different for you? This is about honoring and loving who you are, as you are, but in your truth. And a lot of times, again, we have kind of gotten away from that because we have been conditioned to, in a lot of ways, to try to fit in, fit the mold, fit directions or paths or ways of being that have been dictated by culture or our lineage or just, so many different things. And in all of this, a lot of our authentic nature gets lost. But there's that part of us that calls us back home, that asks us to reconnect with who and what we are, so that you can fall in love with yourself, fall so in love with who and what you are, have such a deep reverence and gratitude for this life that you've been given, and start to have that same love for all that you see around you, because you start to recognize the truth. Yes, the divine in me is now able to acknowledge the divine in you, because you start to acknowledge that we are all on these journeys of trying to remember. And not everyone remembers in the same pacing, the same way, the same time, and that's okay. For now, focus on embracing your divine self. So I hope that some of this helps you. And again, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, I would love to hear from you. And one of the best ways to embrace your divine nature is through meditation, really going deep into that self-connection. And I have free guided meditations on my website. There's a whole series called Fill Up with Love, and there are 7 meditations that help you connect with yourself in a deeper way and help you to acknowledge the love that is you. So if you need any help with that, hop over to my website. Be sure to find those free meditations. And I hope that you all have a beautiful day, and remember to always journey in love.